So there's a big weekend of fights this Saturday, so for any of you gambling degenerates out there, you might want to bet on the fights. So I've compiled a sort of chart of bets you can make on the fights this weekend. Not just on the Crawford Madrimov card, but also on the surrounding cards in the UK and the one on Wednesday tonight. Now, just to be clear, this is not really a prediction video. This is more of a betting central video based around value, the best bets you can make. If you want to get into the technical aspects of the matchups or anything, this isn't the video for that. So I'm not going to waste any more time. You can skip to the... you can use the pinned comment to skip to the timestamp and see the final result of this chart that you're seeing right now in front of you. But watch the whole way through if you want to see the breakdowns and explanations as to why I've chosen the bets that I've chosen. So we start off with Shakram Giyasov to beat Miguel Parra. Now, just to be clear, this fight is on Wednesday night specifically. So if you're watching this video after Wednesday, you can't bet on this fight afterwards. It's just if you've caught this video at the right time. I don't think any explanation is really needed for this one. If you know Giyasov and you know amateur boxing, you will know why he's easy to win. There's not much value in it, obviously. If you look at the to-win value, it's minus 2,500, which is, you're not going to make much from that. But if you're making any long-term parlays or accumulator bets with other favourites on, this is a very easy one you can add. Even ignoring the fact that Giyasov's done pretty well for himself in the pros, if you look at his amateur record, he's got some ridiculous wins, like 2 wins over Roniel Iglesias, Pat McCormack, Ablikan Zusupov, Imantas Stanionis. Very, very good wins. He's a really good amateur. He's looked good in the pros. And his opponent, Miguel Parra, he's lost to Florian Marcoux, which is not a good look for him whatsoever. Obviously, you can argue that he should have won that fight, but you shouldn't be making it close with Florian Marcoux in any way. So, easy win for Shakram Giyasov. Add him to your long-term bets. Easy win. Moving on to another fight, which is also on Wednesday, we have Mark Castro versus George Acosta. Now, I think Mark Castro is pretty good as a minus 500 favourite. You might not rate Mark Castro that highly. I don't either. But I think a good matchup for him is someone who doesn't have much power to respect, and that is George Acosta. You can see with his knockout ratio. Obviously, the knockout ratio doesn't say everything about an opponent, but it is a pretty telling way of like saying this guy doesn't hit very hard. If you're going to capitalise on Mark Castro's poor defence, you need to be able to hit enough to make him pay for it. And Acosta can't do that. We've seen him beaten up by guys like Hene Tellez Giron. Pretty bad loss to have Mark Castro. He's improving. Even though he's not great, he is improving. And I would say that Acosta's the hardest opponent he's fought so far, but I think with his career trajectory, I think minus 500 is pretty generous. And I would add him to some low-stake bets. Moving on to a fight on Saturday on the Zach Chelly undercard, we have Kayoman Agyarko versus Tomi Silvennoinen. Now, this is pretty much exactly the same as Giyasov versus Parra, because this is a layover for Agyarko, right? You may not think that Agyarko's that good. I don't think he is either. But you just look at the opponent. He's lost to quite a few European-level opponents. Agyarko's got a pretty decent ceiling. Not much more to say than that. This is an easy matchup. Agyarko's minus 2,000. Should be a layover. Add him to your parlays. Same with Giyasov. We move on to the first fight on the Crawford card. We have Ziad Almaayouf versus Michal Bulik. Almaayouf is a minus 2,000 favourite, which I think is completely wrong, and I would not bet on him whatsoever. This is the first fight that I would not bet on out of the things I've mentioned. Simply because if you've watched Almaayouf before, he's quite a regular on these Saudi cards. He's not impressive at all. He got dropped in his second fight pretty badly. Looked rubbish in quite a few of his fights. He's not an impressive prospect at all. He's got a very minimal amateur background. He's not great. Michal Bulik, he's not great either. Obviously, he's a journeyman. He's got a KO loss to Campbell Hatton, of all people. But, I don't think he's quite good enough to confidently pick an upset. You might want to sprinkle a little bit of money on him just in the event that he might win. But The scorecards will be in Almaayouf's favour. He'll probably win. If you get decision odds, I'd bet on Almaayouf decision maybe if you feel like it. But besides that, I would stay away from this fight. It's not worth betting on. The second fight on the Crawford card, we have Steven Nelson versus Marcos Vazquez Rodriguez. Now, Nelson is minus 800 to win this fight. I think that's very generous. I wouldn't play with any props in this fight. I wouldn't play knockout. I wouldn't play decision or anything. I'd stick to the minus 800 for a long-term sort of accumulator because it's hard to tell whether he gets the knockout or not in this fight. Marcos is very unproven. And there's not much tape you can find on Rodriguez either. There's about 2 fights you can find online, both of which went about the distance. Marcos has a lot of red flags in terms of a fighter that might give you an upset. Like, he's an undefeated Mexican fighter. There's not much to know about him, but if you watch the tape on Marcos Vazquez Rodriguez, you know that he's not a dangerous fighter whatsoever. He fights off the back foot mostly, throws a lot of straight punches. He's quite unathletic, right, which is the separator between these two, because if you've watched Steven Nelson, one of his strengths is that he's very naturally strong, quite a snappy puncher. Opposite to Marcos Rodriguez, he's very slow, sort of. I wouldn't say very slow. There's not much snap to his punches, if you know what I mean. So there's not much danger there. I don't see Nelson getting flash KO'd by this guy. It won't happen. Nelson's going to beat him to the punch. He's much better athletically, much better reflexes, much better jab. We'll probably see a decision win for Nelson. Add him to your parlays. Easy win. Moving on to the first of the main 5 fights on the Crawford card, we have Andy Cruz versus Antonio Moran. Now, Cruz to win should not be a question whatsoever. He's definitely winning. And the odds reflect that. He's minus 2,500. But the question is really, does he get the knockout or not? To be honest, I think he does. The odds favour Cruz to get a decision. The odds, I believe, are minus 120 as opposed to knockout, which is minus 105. But I think from watching Cruz's fights, there's very valid excuses as to why he went the distance in 2 of them. When he fought Juan Carlos Burgos, right? Burgos has never been KO'd, right? And he's fought some very, very good opposition, like Mikey Garcia back in the day, Keyshawn Davis. He got beaten up by Keyshawn Davis. Didn't go down once, right? So he can be excused for that in his pro debut. Then he just destroys Giovanni Straffon. Not even close. That was a magical performance from Cruz. Then he fights Brian Zamaripa, which that was one that I was expecting a knockout from, but I was not expecting Zamaripa to fight the way he did, which was just... Remember Paul Butler versus Inoue? That, but even worse, because he didn't even try. He threw about... I think the final stats said he threw about 50 punches across 12 rounds, which was silly. He clinched and just did not want to try and fight whatsoever. He was in there to survive 12 rounds. So you can excuse him for that. Antonio Moran, on the other hand, is the opposite to that. He's there to fight. He's pretty easy to hit relatively. He's been knocked out once by Devin Haney, which is that famous overhand knockout you might have seen a highlight of. Besides that, he's got losses to quite a lot of pillow-fisted opponents. I wouldn't say pillow-fisted, but opponents that aren't punches, right? Like Jermaine Ortiz, like Jose Pedraza, like Arnold Barboza Jr., people like that. He's not losing to like hard punches and surviving. He's fighting non-punches and making it the distance. I believe Cruz is the best boxer he will face, and that's why I believe a knockout will come. But if you don't feel confident in the knockout, you can play his money line just like the other bets that I've mentioned before. Easy money. No sweat whatsoever. We move on to the first competitive matchup on the card. We have Andy Ruiz versus Big Baby Jarrell Miller. Now, this is a very obese matchup, which makes it interesting, and which usually means that it will go the distance. That is my main pick for this fight. I believe that it will very much go the distance. I think that's better than picking Ruiz to win. I think that's better than picking Jarrell Miller to win. If you look at these odds, right, Ruiz to win, I would not play that whatsoever. September of 2022 when he fought Luis Ortiz. And since then he's been dealing with all sorts of like weird issues outside the ring with his wife and restraining orders and shit like that. So Ruiz you cannot trust to do anything. Decision might be good value, minus 110. Can't trust him to get a KO. I think, in my opinion, Why distance is such a good bet to make is because these are the two best chins in the division, in my opinion. Andy Ruiz seems uncrackable, in my opinion. Like, he took a very clean combination from Joshua in their first fight, got straight up, instant recovery, right? Didn't seem hurt at all. Jarrell Miller obviously got stopped in the last round by Dubois, but in my opinion, Dubois is one of the best punchers in boxing right now. And it took him until the 10th round. And he's carrying like how much? Like 400 pounds of fat around on him, right? So to make it to the 10th round, eating the amount of punches he was against Dubois, completely gassed out. And even then, he could have gone the distance, right? He never actually went down. So two very good chins in the division. They're going to fight it out in a sloppy, fat sort of way. And that's how it's going to end. I would not play anything besides decision or distance. We move on to David Morell versus Kalajdzic. Once again, this is another mismatch. This is Morell's first fight, 175 pounds, versus a decent opponent in Kalajdzic. He's pretty good. However, I did not like the way Kalajdzic looked in his last fight versus Sullivan Barrera. Not one bit, right? Because he was fighting Barrera, who hadn't fought in about 4 years at that point. And he was getting rocked quite a few times by the old Cuban man. So, and now you're up against one of the best prospects in boxing, who's not really a prospect at this point, he's more of a contender. He could fight for a title right now and probably win. I think Morell to win is almost as certain as his knockout, because when you look at it stylistically, Kalajdzic's got quite weak, leaky defence, right? Wide punches around the top seem to land pretty clean for him because he's very straightforward. His gloves are always sort of in front of him. Morell's very good with his wide punches. He likes to land shots around the guard, which is why Kalajdzic, who we've seen been knocked out before, took a lot of damage against Beterbiev. Saw him rocked many times against Barrera. I think Morell, very athletic, very powerful, very dangerous boxer in Morell, looking to make a statement at 175. I see a knockout in the first 3 rounds, personally. I don't see any other way this goes. Moving on to my personal favourite fight on the card, we have Anderson versus Bakole. Now, these are two of my favourite upcoming boxers in the division. Like, if these two beat Joseph Parker, I would not be surprised. Or Zhilei Zhang, would not be surprised at all. But this matchup specifically, if you look at the line there, plus 1,000 for Bakole by decision, I think that's silly. Bakole could not put away Tony Yoka, right? So if you're picking Bakole, you should be winning by decision, really. Right, I don't know why the lines are like that, but they are. Regardless, I wouldn't go too heavy on it though, just because I do think Anderson's going to win. Right, I think stylistically this is a bit of a nightmare for Bakole. If you look at the iffy performances on Bakole's record, you know, you've got the Michael Hunter fight, you've got the Sergey Kuzmin fight. Hunter gave him issues because Hunter's very mobile and made Bakole come to him while moving very well, which threw Bakole off. Because I think Bakole's best attribute is being able to land shots around the guard of a slow opponent. If he's fighting someone who's always on the move, who's got good range, good distance management, that will throw him off quite a lot, especially if he's against a guy like Jared Anderson, who's always throwing the jab out there, playing with the lead hand, landing check counters. And Bakole just, in general, is very vulnerable, like very there to be hit. His head is very, like, right there to be punched in the face, basically. Right, and Jared Anderson, I think he's at his best on his back foot, in my opinion. But if I had to choose between knockout and decision for Jared Anderson, I have to say knockout, to be honest, because Bakole's not going to go away. He's going to be in there. And even though his chin's really good, you know, Anderson hits quite hard. He's a hard-punching guy, right? And if you're eating counters from Anderson for 10 straight rounds, it's not good for you. I'd pick Anderson by KO, personally, out of all these. Money line to win is pretty good value. I'd play that as well. But if you want to hedge a bit with Bakole decision, I'd strongly recommend that. Plus 1,000 is ridiculous. Moving on to the co-main event, we have Cruz versus Jose Valenzuela. Now, I'm seeing a lot of people trying to call the upset for Cruz to lose to Valenzuela. And to be honest, I understand. Right, Cruz, very limited, very one-dimensional boxer. Didn't look great against Giovanni Cabrera. But Cabrera's a weird one. He's a very weird matchup for Isaac Cruz specifically, with the massive reach disadvantage, massive height disadvantage. For Valenzuela, I think he's capable of winning. He's a very talented boxer. Very young as well. I think he's 23. Very high ceiling to make. Very powerful boxer. Quite well-rounded. But the issue is with Valenzuela, his defence isn't great, as we saw against Edwin de los Santos. He's one loss on his record. He got clipped pretty easily with big hooks around the guard, which is, if you watch Isaac Cruz, the only punches he throws are hooks. So I think if Jose finds his way with his back to the ropes at any point against Isaac Cruz, it's going to be very, very, very dangerous for him. And I don't think he can survive that. I think we'll see Valenzuela do well. I think he'll bank some early rounds with his angles, with his punching power, keeping Isaac Cruz away, his straight right hand. But Isaac Cruz, his defence is very good, right? That's what I like the most about Isaac Cruz, the way that he's so aggressive and he keeps such a tight guard at the same time, right? That being said, though, I would not play the minus 450 to win line for Isaac Cruz. I don't think that's good enough. It's KO decision, really, for me. For a long shot, you'd play Valenzuela by decision. I don't think he'll knock out Isaac Cruz. He's too defensively good for that. His chin's very, very good. 12 rounds with Tank Davis. It's hard to decide between the two, to be honest. If you want to put Isaac Cruz on a bigger parlay, you can play the money line, but pick decision for the value, I guess. We move on. The main event, Terence Crawford versus Israil Madrimov. When this fight was first announced, I was thinking this is a dangerous fight for Crawford, right? Because I'd bet on Madrimov a couple of times. I bet on him versus Mikhail Soro, and I bet on him versus Magomed Kurbanov on that Joshua and Ngannou undercard. And he's very good. I think he's a solid top 5 fighter at 154. But after closely watching some of his other fights, I don't think he's that good, to be honest. I think you have to be a certain, like, A++ level talent to beat Bud Crawford. I don't think Madrimov's that. I think the only danger he really faces here is the fact that he's got quite a big height and, like, size advantage over Crawford. He's a taller guy. He's got a strong reach. He uses his lead hand very well. So my favourite play for this fight personally would be decision, because if you watch the last fight that Crawford had that went to a decision, that was Victor Postol. And if you know Victor Postol, you will know that immediately there's some comparisons to be drawn between Madrimov and Victor Postol. With their, like, lead hand heavy style, they like to touch a lot. Very stiff, very upright boxers. Madrimov obviously hits harder, he's stronger, he's bigger. But personally, I think Postol's better defensively. I don't think Madrimov's defence is that great, which is what makes it difficult to pick a decision for Crawford, because Crawford's such a ridiculous, like, counter-puncher. Like, you don't know how he's going to get his knockouts, but he will find his way somehow. I do lean decision just because I don't think Crawford's going to put himself in too much danger. I think he knows Madrimov is, in the exchange, is very dangerous. So I think he'll stay away relatively. I think he'll play a lot of the fight on the back foot, which is why decision's pretty good. Crawford to win, though, if you want to keep it safe, obviously Crawford to win, that's a no-brainer, but there is not much value whatsoever on the minus 700. So you pick him to win on a larger bet, or you pick him by decision, one of them two, really. I'm not against Madrimov by decision, if you want to hedge a little bit, but Bud's probably going to win. He's really good. Should win the fight. So to lay out all my picks in a presentable way, you can see all my picks for their varying levels of confidence. If you're on super confident, that's a fight there's no way it doesn't happen unless some random... Let's say Giyasov's leg blows out, like he snaps his ankle mid-fight. That's what would happen to make him lose that one. Crawford to win, Ruiz middle distance. I'm pretty sure those happen. Like, pretty sure. I'd bet money on it. Comfortable, you'd bet money on it. Not too much, but you might bet on it. You might notice Mohamed Mamouni was not mentioned earlier, and that's because I forgot to put him on some probable. Those are bets that are sort of 50-50. Could go decision, could go knockout. I lean decision for Crawford and Anderson by knockout, so those are the picks I'd go for. Bakole decision's only for value. He's only on there because it's plus 1,000, which is ridiculous. I don't think that should be the number that they give for Bakole decision. And Almaayouf, don't bet on Almaayouf at all. Unless you want to sprinkle on the underdog, or if the decision's decent odds, don't bet on Almaayouf. It's not worth it. He's not good at all. I think that's it, to be honest. Goodbye.